Good morning, Dallas Startup Week. I'm David Matthews with RevTech Ventures here in downtown Dallas. And RevTech is a early stage seed capital, venture capital fund focused at the intersection of technology and retail. When we envisioned this session, it was going to be in the evening and involving tequila shots. So it's framed as a debate between robots and humans, who will win. But being 10:30 in the morning, I think we're not going to have the debate, but we have Chris Todd, who is an expert at humans working with robots, and Jeff Donaldson, who is an expert at robots working with humans. So we're going to pull these two viewpoints together, and we're all going to learn something here. So I want to make introductions first. Jeff Donaldson was a chief information officer at GameStop for over 15 years. For his last 2 years there, he ran the GameStop Institute, focused on innovation in their business models. Then he left a few years ago and founded Intriosity, a design consultancy. So Jeff, tell us a little about your work at Intriosity.
Well, it is all about using design to identify automation opportunities. How do I use robots? What are the value assessments associated with various options for using robots in a business, and how to go forward with that.
So maybe to set the stage here, Jeff, how do you define robot for purposes of our conversation today?
Yeah, I like to use a pretty, I guess, broad definition of robot, but a robot is an intelligent either hardware that accesses intelligence to provide a service to humans, or a software bot that accesses intelligence to provide that service to humans. And I also like to include embedded devices. That increasingly we're seeing embedded devices that have access to intelligence that also use that intelligence to serve robots. So either hardware, software bots, or embedded devices.
Hardware, software bots, embedded devices. Okay, yeah. That covers the gamut. Well, Chris, let's bring you into the discussion here. Chris Yull is what's called a serial entrepreneur. He is now working on at least his second venture. In the past, he started, scaled, and had successful exit with a company called AppTrigger, which he sold to Metaswitch Networks. And then sometime after that, he started Theatro, and he has been building that company for the past 8 years. So Chris, please tell us about your work at Theatro and how your product market and deployment of your product has evolved.
Sure. Good morning. Thanks, Dave and Jeff. Great to see you as well. So when we started Theatro, we recognized that the world had gone mobile, and everybody was building functionality and capabilities to support their professional and work lives using mobile devices. Yet, even as the world went mobile, mobile passed over a very large sector of the workforce, and those being hourly workers. And hourly workers were being underserved, if you will, from smart devices, like these, simply because the worker that worked in either or manufacturing or hospitality or so forth needed their hands to be free and their eyes to be free in order to do their job. And so they couldn't be interrupted by looking at a screen or holding a handheld computer. And so Theatro looked at a way our team came up with a concept of how do we build a new type of mobile platform that enables this workforce to get access to mobile information while they're doing their job, but without creating a distraction for either their hands or their eyes. And we did it in a unique way, which is using voice. And so we built a voice virtual assistant, or as we would just define it, a software robot, artificial intelligence that would augment the employee's own internal knowledge or experience by providing them information into their ear while they're doing their job. in order to do their job better. And so we've been at this for about 8 years, and it's really exciting to see the development and the advancements in technology that has made Theatro successful and allowed our customers to take advantage of some of the cool things we're developing. So great to be here and great to talk about what we're up to and how this helps out the Dallas community.
So, Chris, I think you passed a milestone in the last year or so. Isn't your solution for store associates now deployed in more than 10,000 stores?
Well, we will be, Dave. We're in the process of rolling it out to about that many. We got 2,200 underway, and we've got a big deployment in the works right now. So we've got just about every, a lot of the tier one retailers that anybody's out there that's participating in our session today probably goes to the tier one brand names that you're used to shopping at every day, especially the essential retailers. You might notice that when you go in there, an employee, most people tend to think of when they see an employee utilizing their voice. Historically, they've used a walkie-talkie radio or an overhead paging system. Now, if you pay attention, you might see this tiny little device. This is our little wearable IoT device, in their pocket or on their side. But that's a little mobile computer that has a voice virtual assistant embedded with it that answers questions that they have or helps them do their job better. So it's pretty prolific, and several 100,000 employees across the U.S. depend on it every day, and we expect that it's such a large there's such a large workforce out there that we've got a huge opportunity ahead of us to continue to grow and expand and develop more functionality to help those workers do better.
Yeah, that's incredible, Chris. I should mention, everybody, the common link between the three of us is all three of us are involved with RevTech. Jeff and Chris are both very valuable active mentors with RevTech and have mentored companies that we've invested in over the last several years. And RevTech, in turn, has also invested in Chris's company, Theatro. Very small, but we're on your cap table. So I want to bring, there's a question that you hear a lot, that the singularity is coming, right? And the singularity is the moment that humans cede control to the robots, and the robots take control of everything. Yet most of the things billed as artificial intelligence out there seem to boil down to basic pattern matching. So where are we in this evolutionary process of humans and robots working together? And that's for any of us to jump at. But Jeff, maybe you take the first crack, because you think about this all day.
I'll take the first crack. I think, first of all, artificial general intelligence is way off. I don't see that in this century. Artificial general intelligence is the idea that a robot will think like, respond like, have the skills of a human being, and would have the physical skills, for example, that human beings have. That's way off into the future. Narrow AI has been really productive for the world, has been really productive for industry, for humans. And narrow AI is really what we're talking about. AI that is targeted towards solving a specific problem. And I really think we're still at the beginning stages. I think there's so much work to do in this field, and there's so much opportunity for entrepreneurs as well. There's so many problems that we haven't solved. It's a tremendous opportunity. And we're at the very beginning of that. I believe that Chris explained how Theatro works, and I think that this is the best of the narrow AI solutions. It augments humans. It helps humans be more productive. There's all sorts of examples where narrow AI, for example, scans when shipments come through Long Beach port in Southern California. They look for illegal material coming into the United States. They can only handle about 1% of the cargo containers that come into that port, but they've started to scan and you kind of, just like an MRI, you kind of cut that container into slices and then you scan that for illegal goods. And they're automating that process because humans can only scan 1%, as an example. A narrow AI solution is going to be able to scan all of those containers that come through. And there's just so many examples of narrow AI helping lawyers find the appropriate legal documents or precedent that they need to present a case in court. Doctors looking at cancer, lung X-rays and finding through artificial intelligence, finding signs of cancer that the human eye couldn't spot. And so, in terms of where we're at, we're still at the beginning stage of solving these problems. And I'm going to let Chris comment here, but I think there's other part of that question is about balance and when we're going to get to balance and how we get to balance. And so I think that's something that's very important to explore as we kind of continue to explore this topic.
Yeah, what do you think, Chris? Where are we in the evolution?
I would agree. I think that, David, even though they build this as a debate, I don't think it's much of a debate because Jeff and I agree on so many of the aspects here. And,
we're drinking coffee. We're not doing a tequila shot. So, yeah, it's the conversation.
That's true. Where's my margarita? Margaritas are not just for breakfast anymore, Dave. Come on. We should be, even virtual world, we should have that. But the point is, so a lot of people think and fear about robots and robotics and AI is that it's going to replace the human. That's in reality, as Jeff was pointing out, we're in the very, very, very early stages of some of this development, to the point that, whether it's the rest of the century or even in the next, the idea that AI will be advanced enough or computers will be advanced enough to do actual reasoning and importing constant flows of new information like the human brain can do is way, way out there. It's certainly not going to be practical in an everyday environment for quite some time. But that doesn't mean that actually in the meantime, we think there's a huge opportunity to augment humans with additional intelligence to make them better and more productive, right? Because it's almost impossible, certainly at my age, to remember everything I've learned and everything I've known and everything I learned in school and so forth. If you could have this just perfect memory to recall everything, that's not a reality. But if I could augment my own intelligence with an outside source, it's going to make me better. And that's where I think the real opportunity is. And we tend to think about, and we're pretty strong in our belief that it's not about computers or humans. It's computers and humans. It's the and that's the opportunity, right? Of how to blend the two together. And so that's what we're doing at Theatro, which is if you will, we've set up an objective where to be able to achieve a day where an employee, an associate in a store could answer that a customer has, even on their very first day. And if you think about that, on the first day, an employee that starts a new job doesn't know anything. They don't know anything. They don't even know who knows what. They don't know who they work with. They don't know what they know or what they're good at. Well, if I had a virtual assistant, a little computer, a little intelligent one, think of like if I had Siri in my ear, the ability to tell me everything I need to know to onboard me and assist me and answer customer questions could be hugely impactful. But I'm not replacing the human. I'm not making the humans dumber. I'm actually making the person smarter. And we think that's the big opportunity going forward is how do you build more and more functionality to support, whether it's as simple as an associate in a store to as complex as a doctor or the lawyer example that Jeff used. All of those things are real possibilities over the next 10, 20, 30 years that's going to get more and more intelligent and more impactful. I'll give you a good example of one of the things that we're working on that relates to this area called decision support. Decision support is using artificial intelligence to enable a human to make a better decision because you're reminding them in the moment of how critical and the priority aspects that need to be considered. Doctors do this, surgeons do this today, where they're in a really in the middle of an important operation, and just the ability to have somebody remind them of where to be careful about, or what to do, or what the sequence of steps are, makes the outcome even better. We're doing that in our simple world. If you can imagine, if in a retail or a service industry environment, if you have an emergency erupt, right? Sad to say it, normally this might be like a medical emergency or a fire, or today civil unrest. Something like that happens within a retail environment. Usually there are things that a general manager or store manager are supposed to do. Here's your top 5 things you're supposed to do. But unfortunately, that's in a manual that's in their office that they might pull out once every 4 or 5 years when it ever happens. Well, time is critical in a lot of these emergency situations. So if you can imagine a scenario where you could augment that person's own memory by, when they talk to the virtual assistant and say, we have a fire, and she reminds them, here's the top 5 things you're supposed to do immediately. The response time goes way up. Decision support in those situations is critical, and yet that's very real, right? And then could be augmented in a much more intelligent way. Imagine if you were a store manager and you needed to evacuate a very large building. Well, what's critical is to know, where is everybody, and how many are still left in the building, and is everybody moving towards the exits? Well, having that ability to have that information in real time, alerting them, all right, now there's 50 people in the building, now there's 30 people in the building, and most of the people went out the east side of the building, not the west side. So whatever the threat is must be on the west side. Having that intelligence and that information relayed real time to a general manager or store manager in live decision support is real, it's possible, and those kind of things are going to be continuing as we add more and more intelligence to the way that we support the employees that utilize our platform.
Yeah, it seems like in retail settings, we're seeing that the robots are really taking over mundane functions, like automated checkout, for example, and that's being expanded now to even be to where you can check in and identify yourself when you enter a store and grab what you want and leave. So the checkout is happening as you proceed through a store. Also, you see it in the back of the house with robots that are picking items from shelves, or literally bringing the shelves to the packing area. But in all these scenarios, you still see humans in a higher order function. Even in an Amazon Go store, for example, you see humans in a higher order function, making sure the customer's being served, right?
Right. Well, at the end of the day, the common thing on a lot of these, it's a service industry, and humans like to be serviced by humans in a lot of ways. You like to buy from humans. You like to have an emotional connection with what you're doing when you're purchasing something. But there is a huge benefit for a lot of the productivity aspects of fulfillment, right, in the distribution center or back of house and so forth. And a lot of those functions can be automated with robotics and with intelligence to make them more efficient and so forth. And we expect that to continue. But usually a lot of the front end of it is unpredictable, and therefore a human is a better interface to the users in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Well, Chris,
yeah, sorry, David. I do think it's important that we state that, or at least for me, it's important to say that what we're not saying is that robots and automation will not have an impact on jobs. There will be an impact on employment. As an entrepreneur listening into this conversation, I think it's important to know that. And I think it's important, if you're providing a product that has an impact on employment, that you have an answer for your customer on exactly what your recommendations are in terms of how to deal with that. And a couple things. One is, when it comes to that front end of the service, somehow FedEx lost a book that I bought on Amazon, and I was able to call Amazon and generated new orders, didn't cost me anything, book arrives the next day. And I didn't talk to a human, I talked to a robot, and it was fantastic. So you kind of have to look at it and say, well, there's a lot of kind of mundane interactions. I don't need to talk to a human. I don't want to talk to a human. This robot generated a new order for me. All I had to do was say, yes, please do that. It's kind of a disembodied voice. I didn't mind. And it was very efficient. I didn't have to wait in line on the phone. That's something that when you look at it, Amazon's getting a tremendous return on scale on something like that. No matter what the problem is, they can just scale up, and there's all sorts of concurrent robots that can handle those problems for customers. So there's a large number of things that are just appropriate for robots. But I think that just really fast, if you go to the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI website, there's 3 studies on how robotics impacted employment in 3 industries, and they're really interesting. And if the punchline from these studies is that in the nursing home industry in Japan, they had a significant implementation of care robots that had no impact on employment. Service levels went up, quality of service to those patients went up, no impact on employment. In the US banking industry, ATM implementations, robo-advisors, et cetera, they actually caused a slight increase in employment in the banks. And the way that happened is what you're talking about, David. They had all these higher order capabilities that they wanted to build within the banking industry. And what they did was they moved people that were displaced by the robots into those higher order analytical functions, et cetera. The other thing that happened there was because they could employ an ATM and multiple ATMs in branches, the cost of a branch went down. They didn't have to have as many tellers in that particular branch. So they just built more branches. Overall impact of that growth in branches being that they had a slight increase in employment. But it was really interesting in the automotive manufacturing and electronics manufacturing industries, for every robot deployed from 2005 to 2010, 45 jobs were lost. So employment went down, productivity went up. What happened from 2010 to 2016, however, was for every robot deployed, 30 jobs were created. And so what the difference there is that once those companies were able to compete better with offshore manufacturing, their costs, the productivity went up, their cost per unit of labor went down, so they were more attractive to build their market. The contract manufacturers were more attractive to product designers. And so they swung back. So they swung the balance as they went through 2010 through 2016. So I think if you're an entrepreneur and you have that kind of solution, it's good to know those studies. It's also good to know what it is that brings employment back, if you will. And what brings employment back is a focus on growth, a focus on new services, and a focus on new markets. And so to get balance, it won't be an even transition. There'll be employment losses, but we will get balance because we'll swing back toward growth and new capabilities.
Yeah, well, I know we have a lot of entrepreneurs in our audience this morning, and I'd really like both of you to kind of share kind of an early stage example. And Jeff, I'm recalling with you, we invested in a company called Excel Robotics 3 years ago. And you really helped them early on. They were going to have robots rolling around storefronts, helping customers like find products there. And something Chris is probably chuckling about because he helps humans do that very thing. But you really helped Excel Robotics think through the process of what they were trying to do and the core asset that they really had that they could build upon. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, first
evolution?
of all, it's easy to help smart people. And the Excel folks, they were intensely interested in robotics. Maybe the first experiment that they had wasn't maybe the most practical, if you will. But what we did to sort of think through problems, application of the computer vision capabilities that they had associated with their service robot. What we did was we developed narratives. And in the narratives, and by the way, first of all, they were very focused on, to start with, they were very, very focused on retail problems and priorities. They kind of had that, they had a number of, they had done enough market research where they had a number of options. So understanding the problems and priorities of retailers wasn't an issue with these guys. They understood unmet needs of customers in that retail environment, and they had a list of problems and priorities. What really got it to execution mode was the exploration of narratives, so the exploration of use cases. So I think for the entrepreneurs that are listening in here, you might, if you can develop strategic foresight by developing narratives, some of the tech companies hire science fiction writers to actually develop these narratives, because you have to have a little bit of imagination on how your solution is going to actually roll out, what the possibilities are. But if you develop those narratives and you develop those use cases, it's relatively, in my opinion, it kind of pops out in terms of specifically what your product roadmap should look like in order to address those narratives. And then it pops out what the value is for solving those problems via those narratives. That's something that we explored, pretty in depth. And what we found, and this just kind of happens in robotics, is that one of the key things that you want to identify is a metric called return on scale. And I'm not sure if everyone in the audience is familiar with it, but essentially it's, assigning, it's basically looking at a solution, looking at the infrastructure, looking at the input costs, looking at the labor costs that's associated with that solution, and then saying, well, okay, I deal with whatever number of units. I deal with 100 stores today. Well, what if I had 10,000 stores or 20,000 stores? And so what you want is, you obviously don't want any kind of linear growth in costs for that retailer, or linear, let's say, linear consumption of a precious resource, which often labor is that precious resource, And so by working through these narratives, you can really understand what your parameters are on return on scale. And in robotics, we expect a very attractive return on scale, obviously, because you should be able to scale that solution without burning through a lot of raw materials, burning through a lot of labor, burning through a lot of costs, etc. So that process actually turned out really well.
Yeah, well, thanks to your guidance, they really drilled in on their machine vision capability, and were able to partner with MasterCard, and then brought in SoftBank as a financial investor who brought over 30 million of growth capital. And now they're building automated stores with MasterCard for Loblaws, Rite Aid, Dunkin' Donuts, several other brands. So they really changed their vision by really drilling in on what was core, thanks to your help there. So Chris, I want also from you, if you could dial us back to Theatro like 6 years ago, when you were just alpha testing this product in a Container Store down in Austin. What was it? Take us back to before you were at scale with a massive team and building this thing out. What was it like to really kind of fine tune your message at the beginning?
Right. Well, Dave, I wish an interesting lesson in for all the entrepreneurs out there that are looking to start their own business or have started their own business. I think a key takeaway or a lesson we learned and have learned over and over again is you're never going to have it always right. So don't worry about it, right? In other words, it's more about what I would consider to be, fail, pivot, fail, pivot, fail, pivot. In other words, keep moving forward, but learn from your experiences of what your, what the environment and situation tells you. Because if you get too focused or too dialed into them, you think you know the answer, but you're not listening to the feedback that you're getting. Sometimes you'll entirely. And yet, when we first started the company, interestingly enough, we had a simple problem we were looking to solve with our customer, which is we wanted to connect employees together within the store environment to make them more efficient, providing to share. They could do knowledge transfer and employee customer. And yet, so we all thought that once again the smartphone would be the right answer, and we started building a software app. Our first solution was smartphone based and so forth. But what we came to find out through lots of iterations and so forth was that actually wasn't the right answer, and we were on the wrong path. And it was through a pivot to listening to our customer that we homed in on a solution that we ultimately had. Very impactful. So when you think of your what you want to do as far as build a business, you should be very open to feedback and to learning where the where the opportunity may lie, because it's most likely not what you first and or the one you thought of may be fine, but it may be very narrow. And if you're open to the bigger picture opportunities, it could be staring. That was our own experience, and that's what I tend to preach to any entrepreneur that's out there: is don't be scared about failure, because failure is actually a lesson to be learned, and you should continue to. So at the end of the day, that's what's very key.
I remember when you first pitched this 7 or 8 years ago, Chris. In the past, as an entrepreneur myself, I built a company here locally that put on users conferences, and we did like all the audio visual parts. So cameras, spotlights, video screens, the PA system, all that stuff. And we would have all the crew on a comm system so that, you could say to the camera operator to tighten up the shot, or to the sound person to get rid of the echo. And I really related to Theatro, because Theatro is very descriptive of what you've built, which is making the employees in a store function like a crew putting on a production. I love it.
Yep, exactly. Well, a lot of times, and this is the other piece of advice I'd give the entrepreneurs is, you could be focused on building a company that like Elon Musk and send SpaceX rockets to space, which are incredibly complex and incredibly forward thinking and so forth. And I would applaud you if you did that. You need very deep pockets and lots of great investors to back your vision and so forth. But sometimes the littlest things can actually make the biggest impact. And it doesn't have to be rocket science, if you will, to still be successful. When you look at Theatro, we had a simple proposition, which is to connect people together, because a team is stronger than any individual. Right. And so if you can connect everybody together in a frictionless, seamless way, the overall performance of the organization is going to go up. And yet when we looked around, like, what was the common technology that was being used? It was a two-way radio built by Motorola, invented in 1939. It's been around. Nobody felt like it was worth replacing or augmenting. Many people compare Theatro to another company you've probably heard of called Nest. You've heard of Nest, right? Well, what did Nest do? They reimagined the thermostat. Nobody ever cared about the thermostat, that brick that sat on the wall that did one simple thing. Nobody ever cared about that. It was the same forever until Nest came along and said, it's not a thermostat. It's an IP gateway to your house and does all other kind of cool things. Well, Theatro did the same thing. We took a two-way radio, a walkie-talkie, that nobody cared about, that nobody even thought about, and reimagined it as an IP device that's connected that enables you to do just incredible amount of things based on whatever the use case might be and so forth. So once again, it doesn't have to be, the send a person to the moon. It could be something that's fairly simple, and you make improvements on everybody's life. It's a very big problem, and you've got a successful company at that point.
Yeah, Jeff, did you have a thought a minute ago?
No, sir.
Okay, well, if anybody in the audience has questions, we've gotten some texts with interesting use cases and ideas, but if anybody in the audience has a question, please text it into us. I want to see, we've only got about 10 minutes left. I want to see what kind of takeaways we should think about here. What can we really put into action? And Jeff, you're your whole business model with Intriosity is a design consultancy around process. If I remember right, you'll graph out a process that maybe has 50 steps to it, and you'll like work with a team to re-engineer that process to see if you can drill it down to 30 steps. And you do that with using the best of robot capability and human capability, right?
Yeah, that's right. I think in terms of actions, process modeling is sort of a core competency, if you will, I think for being successful here. So I think taking action to improve your process modeling skills, get the right tools, lean tools. Process modeling these days, it's not about swim lanes and, heavy process models that you develop. And one of the reasons for that is because you just need to develop an awful lot of process models. There's a hierarchy to these process models, as you were describing, David. It's very important that the process models that we're talking about will reach, the physical world. And you'll have to understand on the interface to the physical world, what's that robotic or embedded device capability. You have to understand who the customer and the supplier is on all the relationships in these process models. So I say action item number one is to look into look into tools, look into upgrading your capabilities from a process model perspective. And, number two is there's always a customer, there's always a supplier, that's kind of basic, but really treating everybody in that process as a customer, and understanding design thinking, design techniques, techniques for really being empathetic with customers, understanding their unmet needs within those process models is extremely important. And so anything that you do to boost your design skills will help you to come up with and imagine solutions for those, to automate those processes that involve humans, that have the right balance, if you will, between human in the loop, human not in the loop, the right services allocated to 100% automation, although everything needs to be supervised by a human. But design skills will, if you upgrade your design skills or the capabilities on your team from a design perspective, that's going to be very helpful. I think just every situation I go into, this conversation about return on scale always comes up. And it comes up in regards to, if I implement this solution, as I scale it, how will my cost scale? What will my problems be? Will operation of this solution hurt my margins? And we talk about that often in the retail space, obviously. But anything you can do to improve your, and I know it's difficult. If I'm a pure software developer, I probably don't think about being a CFO or being financially, developing a lot of background in finance. But having someone maybe on staff, or maybe someone that you can use kind of on a as needed basis from that perspective, if you can really dig into metrics, business metrics, and how to evaluate effective, productive return on scale, and communicate that to your customers, because they're very interested in that. We're in a COVID period right now. Maybe right now people aren't so worried about growth, but when we're out of the COVID period, people are going to be worried about growth. And growth is kind of what gets us to balance. And so, and when it comes to employment and humans versus robots from a job perspective, so it's really important to dig into this concept of return on scale, understand what that means to your product, and if you need to get some financial help to really understand that well and dig into the metrics, then do that.
Hey, Chris, I wonder if you could speak to Travis's question, then maybe we could come back to Sharon's, but he's asking, what do you feel is the biggest impediment to automating customer service facing roles in retail and restaurants?
Yeah, that's thanks, Dave. Obviously it comes down to one or two things. If you want to do it with a robot or a machine, then obviously there's a lot of inventions and things need to happen there. But in the meantime, if you're going to do it with a human, here's some of the challenges. The fact that in retail and restaurants and so forth, you have incredibly high turnover, right? So you have constant new people coming in. And how do you have a consistent experience for your guests and your customers when you've got to constantly have a new set of faces in front of them and so forth, if you're dealing with a human? Well, the biggest aspect, the biggest, kind of shortcoming is the fact that those humans are not connected to any network, right? I mean, the reality is if you work in a store, you work in a restaurant, for the most part, a majority of them don't have any connectivity to an information system unless they're standing behind a kiosk or a terminal. And once again, they're trying to look it up. And if they're brand new, they're not going to be very proficient at it. And so connectivity, especially mobile connectivity, is a broken problem, right? And so, people have to realize and recognize that this is a mature market. Everybody, the sales of these devices are going down year over year. Why? Because everybody in the world that needs one, wants one, has one. Yet, if you work at In-N-Out Burger and your job is to flip burgers, you cannot have one of these devices in your hand while you're cooking. But at the same time, do you need to be connected to a network? Well, if you're running a register or if you're running any role, the idea, I need connectivity to this neural cloud, this information system that we've created. Well, how could you do that? Well, come up with a new way to solve that and a way to actually get information to that person, and you're going to augment and provide incredible better service, unless you want to replace that person with a robot and a machine that can be very predictable in its outcome. It's one of the two. If you're going to use the human, they got to get connected. If you're going to use a robot, make it very user friendly.
Hey, Chris, question for you. Can Theatros technology enable a store associate to recognize a repeat customer coming in the door of a store or a restaurant?
To say that we absolutely are involved in those kind of use cases, Dave, and the fact that we don't necessarily recognize a user. I mean, even today, our newest device is being used for things like contact tracing and other, kind of social distancing capabilities, and could tie to a customer. But most of the other technology that's out there, whether it's detecting somebody's smartphone, their loyalty app, or facial recognition and so forth, has the ability to do that. And as soon as that other system does, it tells us, and we tell the employee in here, it's Dave Matthews. He's a platinum user, and he's got a strong affiliation to margaritas, right? So it tells me everything I need to know about you as you're coming down the aisle, and I can make a wonderful, great experience for you because I've got access to information. But, otherwise you're going to get the proverbial, what brings you in today, right? You hear that almost at every store you go to. What brings you in today? Well, I'm your best customer at this location. Why don't you know that? I shop here every day. Why don't you know that? Well, because I don't have any information, but I'm going to be really nice and I'll be a pleasant concierge if I'm having a good day. But what brings you in today? Well, that's not going to cut it in tomorrow's world. You've got to actually have a connected employee that actually knows who the customers are and provides a customized, differentiated experience. Otherwise you're going to be left behind.
Yeah. Well, I think that's super cool. If the robot could do the pattern matching and recognize the customer, but tell the human to welcome the customer back, that's powerful.
Absolutely.
So everybody that tuned in here in the last 5 minutes, brilliant, because we're getting to the wrap-up part, and you're in a session with Dave from RevTech here with two of our great RevTech mentors, Jeff Donaldson, CEO at Entriosity, and Chris Todd, CEO at Theatro. And I'm liking our last couple minutes here, Jeff and Chris, just takeaways that these startup entrepreneurs should think about leaving here today. Also, we have a book plug I want to get out there from Sharon. There's a book on leadership by algorithm by somebody named DeKramer. So we should all take a look at that. But anyway, kind of wrap up thoughts, Jeff and Chris. What do we take away from this that we can implement in our startup?
Real quick.
Dave, you said
Go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead.
Design
Go ahead,
is very
Jeff.
important. Sharon's question. Human beings have to supervise and own the robots. Human beings should share in the rewards that automation creates. It's very important to keep humans in that loop. Design is a very good way to explore how to do that effectively.
Well,
Great, thanks.
my last thought is, because of COVID and the pandemic and everything, everybody for a while there was very involved and very in love with the essential worker. Theatro has always been about what we call the forgotten hourly worker. So please don't forget about them. They're doing an incredible job, and we're going to be out there making them as successful as possible. Anybody want to focus on that particular market segment? It's a white space. Almost everybody focuses on the professional worker, whereas in the hourly space or the essential workers that are out there, lots of opportunities. So the entrepreneurs, and if there's anything I can do to help, feel free to reach out to me. I'm Chris@theatro.com.
Great. Oh, thank you, guys. Well, for me, this COVID year of pandemic has been really terrific for retail, depending on where you play in retail. If you're running a physical store or physical restaurant that wasn't deemed essential, you've had a pretty rough year. But the themes we've been investing in, like automation, personalization, inventory management, supply chain transparency, a lot of these themes have really accelerated this year, and it excites me because I think the path forward for humans working in the restaurant, retail, and hospitality industries is pretty promising, because the mundane jobs are quickly getting automated, and the fulfilling jobs where you really get to think and bring value are creating new opportunities for humans. So thank you everybody for participating, and great session. Everybody have a good day.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
See you guys.
See you guys.
Guys.